Hi everyone, this is Natalie Rackley, and this is my reading analysis and explanation. And the reading I had this week was The Primary Elements of the Budget Expenditures by Barr and McClellan. And so the purpose of this section was to provide the reader with brief descriptions of expenses that are commonly found in the budgets of higher education institutions. And so when we say expenditures, that is the same as saying the expenses of institutions. So a little background on this was that in 2007 and 2008, expenditures for higher education institutions reached $400 billion. And two-thirds of this amount was being spent by public institutions. And so that's notable. Up until this point, and throughout the rest of the course, we've kind of talked about public versus private institutions, the differences, the similarities, and in the revenues section, there are very significant differences in how public and private institutions, how they bring in their revenues. But with expenditures, it's important to note that they are very similar. There's not as many differences. And so that's one thing that this section of this chapter brought out. Another thing is that when we talk about expenditures, a lot of times we'll be talking about designated funds, and those are funds that have been identified for a specific purpose. And so this section actually goes through and breaks down and provides very brief overviews of the expenditure categories that one may see commonly in higher education institutions. And so those categories are listed here, and you can see them if you go through the reading. And like I said, there's a brief blurb underneath each one. And so we'll start with salaries. And with salaries, this is the largest expense. It's organized commonly by employee categories, so like faculty, exempt staff, non-exempt staff, technical staff, and or student staff if that is available on your campus. And the author points out that salary funds are commonly not fungible. So what that means is that they can't be reallocated to recurring funds. For example, you can't move someone's salary funds over to travel if you were to need that, or see that you had a deficit in travel. You couldn't move salary funds over for that purpose. So they are not fungible, and they can't really be moved. Next one discussed is benefits, and benefits are a function of expenses for salaries. So there's usually a set percentage of the salary that serves as pretty much the foundation or the basis for calculating the budgeted benefits at the unit level. So typically, higher education institutions overcalculate for benefits, and so that overcalculation serves as if someone were to add a family member in the middle of the year onto their benefit package, or add an additional benefit, then they would have that excess there to cover that difference. And so if there is an excess at the end of the year, say no one added an additional family member or changed their benefits in any way, the excess can be moved into a reserve account, and it'll move from fiscal year to fiscal year. And so then the institution will be able to continue to draw upon that reserve account to manage any shortfalls that they have. The next one is program supplies. Program supplies goes for it would be evaluated program by program, and so the reading points out that a major area that program supplies is an issue can be like an institution's library, and so you need so many different things for that could become a large expense. Office supplies, we all know what office supplies are, and then it discusses how purchasing arrangements with vendors is used by institutions, and so and then different vendors may require that you have an exclusive relationship with them. Computer equipment and softwares, we know technology is always changing, and it talks about how budget managers need to recognize the difference between wants and needs. And so, periodic replacement of hardware and upgrades of software is really the way you want to go. You don't want to just look for the newest and greatest thing. Is what do we need versus what do we just want? So, what can we eliminate? Communication, so that's talking about telephone and data lines. And so these, you want to be sure that you go through and make sure that these lines are active, necessary, and that they're charged to the appropriate place. Publication and printing, so we've all moved to a more digital and computer communication method, but as we all know, higher education still, we rely heavily on printed materials. So there can be annual costs such as student handbooks, and then there's other things such as periodic expenditures, announcements, or one-time occasional cost. And so some institutions may have in-house printing and some may not. And so that's just the choice that the institution makes based on its needs. The next one is postage, and so it talks about this can vary depending on the department that's using it and the mission of that department. So enrollment management may actually use a lot more postage because they're mailing out a lot more things for recruitment purposes. And so it talks about smaller institutions can centralize that rather than go through and the expense of supporting the infrastructure for decentralized cost. So, and then programming and programming support, so that's just different programs may need to host different events. So an example given was the Office of Multicultural Affairs. They may need programming funds for like cultural celebrations that are presented by student organizations. And so you have to, budget managers need to really be familiar with what costs go with which programs, and have those policies and procedures, know what they are, and have those in place to support the institution. Professional development, as we all know, registration fees for webinars, registration fees for conferences, or reimbursements to refresh skills. And so we know that this area is one that takes a large hit every year when the budget comes out. There are usually cuts made to professional development, which is unfortunate. Memberships and periodicals. Personal memberships are usually not covered because you take that if you were to leave the institution, but institutional dues are covered. But your personal expenses, if they're job related, can be tax deductible. Travel, so that includes airfare, ground transportation, meal allowances, and as we all know, most institutions have very tight policies and procedures managing travel, and so the reading points out that you need to closely monitor and make sure that everyone's following these policies and procedures. Entertainments and gifts, so there's usually a lot of restrictions around this, and specific policies need to be in place that specify what is allowed and what's not allowed, where can the money come from. Facilities, so just basic facility maintenance, if you need to change locks or move furniture, that needs to be included in the budget. And utilities is the next two largest thing that continues to increase. So the first would be benefits. The cost of benefits is a large increase every year, and utilities, so electricity, water, sewer, and oil. All of those are large costs that continue to increase. Contracted services, so that's waste removal, copier maintenance, invited speakers, janitorial services, and then debt service, which is usually used by smaller institutions, and this is usually used when smaller institutions are waiting on tuition revenues, so they can pull from this line in the budget to cover cost. Scholarships and fellowships, those are usually covered by tuition revenues, and from like a foundational office, those are usually recovered, but they need to be tracked in the budget. And then miscellaneous, this is an item that everyone should be kind of wary of, And so make sure that you know what's coming and going for miscellaneous, because it can be kind of a catch-all, and it can actually hinder an accurate reflection of expenses. So it's important to know what's coming and going out of miscellaneous and make sure that it's actually something that should be covered. So that's kind of a brief overview of the categories. An evaluation of this was that it was an excellent starting place and a good source of refreshment for readers. And it provides an overview of expenditure categories, and it gives practical advice to budget managers and just individuals who are involved in higher education. So I would say that this is a great, great foundational reading for someone, and it can serve as a refresher. So the discussion questions that I would pose to you are, what are recent trends for expenditures at your institution? So identifies areas of increase and or decrease. Why do you feel as though these areas are impacted? So is there a method to the madness? Why were these areas, or why are they continuing to be chosen for increases or decreases? The second question is, overall, do you feel as though the public is more aware of financial issues that are plaguing higher education? Why or why not? How have contemporary economic conditions affected public sensitivity to expenses at your institution? So, first, very broadly, do you feel like the public is more aware? Why or why not? What causes you to feel that way? And then look specifically at your institution, and do you feel like there's more public sensitivity to expenses there? Thanks, and I look forward to your responses.